Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm very proud to be the founder of Campaign Group Transparency Task Force. We are a UK-based certified social enterprise. Roughly 80% of the 5,000 or so people that we communicate with on a weekly basis are based in the UK, but the other 20% are in 20 countries around the world. As a certified social enterprise, we have to have a formal mission statement, and our mission is, quote unquote, to promote reform of the financial sector so it serves society better. We began way back in 2015 when a group of us started to talk about the idea that the financial industry, whilst it is profoundly important to the well-being of society, also has a very high predisposition to misbehave if you let it. And of course, if you don't have an effective regulation, you do let the financial sector misbehave. And that's what we became very focused on. We quickly learned that it's best for the industry and for consumers if the financial sector became more transparent, more truthful, and more trustworthy. And that's what we're all about. We do a wide range of things to try to positively influence the way the financial industry works. We run events, we publish our weekly newsletter, the Transparency Times. We run the secretariat for an all-party parliamentary group. That's the APPG on investment fraud and fairer financial services. We respond to consultations, we get things in the press, so on and so forth. So that's what we're all about. Of course, we have a website. If anybody here is brand new to the TTF and you'd like to know more, then please don't hesitate to have a good browse at what we're all up to. We've got four more people in the waiting room. I'm just going to let those folks in, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Professor Thirsk, and then we'll pass over to Uma to run the first part of the session before we get to the Q&A and the discussion. So here goes. A little bit about Professor Dr. Umut Thirsk's background. He is a business-facing, student-centered and reflective academic leader with over 30 years of pedagogical experience and more than 2 decades of international expertise in designing, managing and delivering legal education, research and high-impact consultancy projects within prestigious institutions. He has both a theoretical and practical knowledge across a wide spectrum of legal domains, including international trade and economic law, public international law, international arbitration, EU law, comparative counter-terrorism, human rights, financial crime and anti-corruption, energy law, and emerging areas such as AI, which, as you know, folks, is the key topic of our conversation tonight. He also has expertise in relation to virtual assets law. He also has published extensively in the fields of energy law and security, international trade and development, and arbitration. He is a recognized leader in securing and managing external funding. He has a proven track record of forming and leading high performance interdisciplinary teams to deliver legal consultancy, professional training, and education in a timely, collaborative, and impactful manner. He is one of the founders of the International Society of Economic Criminology, and he is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Artificial Intelligence, Risk Regulation, Law and Policy. Professor Dr. Umut Turkson has served as a consultant and trainer for leading international organizations, including NATO, the OECD, and the EU. He's run and helped with government initiatives offering expertise in international security, countering financial crime and terrorist financing, and the governance of emerging technologies, including, of course, AI. There's a lot more you could spend time learning about our speaker tonight, Professor Dr. Umut Turkson. But what we'll do now is simply show our appreciation that he set aside an hour or so to be with us this evening to talk about the very, very important and rather timely topic all about AI and finance, power, risk, and the future of regulation. Can we please show the professor our appreciation for being here? Thank you very much indeed, Umut. Thank you, thank you,
Good
thank
evening,
you.
and thank you, everyone, all across.
Over to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Um, Okay, I wish I was in a job interview. That was an amazing introduction to me. So thank you for a generous introduction. I just need to find my slides. I
Uh-huh.
think this one. Um, so I came across the topic of AI when I was leading an EU-funded research project called Trace. We designed an AI-driven investigation tool for law enforcement agencies, but also realized we had one partner from the private industry providing consultancy to mainly big banks about how to manage money laundering risks and also sanctions. So I got interested in the impact of AI through that and did some ethical and legal compliance work to ensure that our tool was watertight in that respect. Um, And I think just like any technology, we can be optimistic and pessimistic about new technology. I always use the example of aeroplanes. I think they were invented by optimists, but the parachute was invented by a pessimist. So I think we
Mm.
need both when we look at new technology, but also I think King Midas is a good example who, was granted a wish and he wanted everything he touches to be gold, and he regretted it very quickly. And I think AI is something like that. So the first starting point is, we need to have that consciousness and responsible use of new technology, and AI is no different. I'm sharing with you what I like to, use in this presentation as to what I mean by AI, not because this is the best definition of an AI system, but I think this reflects pretty much um, what the financial services industry sector is using in terms of AI tools. It reflects, captures the systems that are being used. They are adaptive, they are data driven, they are increasingly autonomous. So that's the type of AI I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a calculator or, very smart coffee machine that is being programmed to deliver predetermined results. So um, and perhaps we should mention that we don't have a legal definition of AI in the United Kingdom at the moment. Um, in terms of the financial services, pretty much most of the data that I could find comes from the banking sector, which is nice to have quite a good analysis and critique what's happening. According to a recent study by the Bank of England, um, 75% of firms in the financial services have been using AI, and many more thinking of adapting AI. And what I was also interested was briefly to look into what's been happening in the last couple of decades since AI and automated systems have been used. We're seeing a very consistent and increased closure of face-to-face banking services. What I mean by that is the branches. So you can see perhaps in the slide there that,
We're still seeing the first slide that you were
oh,
showing
I'm
at the beginning.
sorry, have I
That's okay.
not changed it?
There we go. There we
Apologies.
go. That's it. Thank you. Thank
So this was the definition I was talking to you about that comes from the EU AI Act. As I said, I think it captures what I'm talking about. And here are some figures. Apologies, I forgot to move down in my slide. So as you can see, in 11 years, we had over 6,000 bank branches closed down in the UK. And another study indicates that between 22 and 25, 1,500 plus further banks were closed. However, if you look at the profits made by the Big Four, you can see before tax 44.2 billion profits were achieved in that period. So really, we need to be critical what impact these automated systems and AI have in our employment figures as well, and how we deal with that. And okay, we establish that the banks are using AI and financial services are using AI. Why are they using it? The argument is, according to various studies, they do this to ensure integrity, longevity, resilience, productivity, improve their decision making, and so on and so forth, I guess profit comes into it without a doubt. And if you look at how they're using it, not just why, so we see that they use it for a number of purposes, including onboarding customers, which can be done in seconds now with the help of AI, compliance risk management. What we mean by that, this in the context of which I'm looking at, is these risk-based anti-money laundering reporting, identification of suspicious transactions or activities. So these are some of the use cases that AI is being deployed. And you can see what are the drivers apart from integrity and what else. These are some of the biggest amounts of fines that banks have been imposed for failing to comply with either anti-money laundering regulations or sanctions regime. And they are eye-watering amounts, to say the least. HSBC was fined 3 billion, and the highest fine was posed on BNP Paribas, 8 billion. So you can see the drivers are both, productivity, but also trying to navigate the regulatory framework that they must operate on. What features across the whole sector that, and also other sectors in which AI is used, is not just the trustworthiness of the machine, the computer system, and the algorithms, but really the data. A lot of people are talking about the integrity and trustworthiness of AI, but I would like to emphasize, for me, more important element is the data. Can we trust the information? That's really, really important, particularly, with the legacy data sets that have been perhaps meddled with or been created by certain ideologies, whatever they may be. The trustworthiness of the data going into machines can be problematic. Okay, these are some of the leading tech companies that provide AI-driven solutions. I won't have time to go into all of those, but I just thought I will mention them because some people who are joining this call may not be familiar with such brands. So I'm not affiliated with them. I don't have any incentives to advertise them, but these are the most commonly used systems, AI systems, by the banking sector. And they are not cheap. Okay, so we've already said that we don't have AI legal definition of AI in the UK, and neither do we have a specific legislation to regulate AI. What the approach of the UK government seems to be, both under the current government and the previous, is that they would regulate AI through the 90 plus regulators we have in the country. So health, financial services, I don't know, nuclear energy, various regulators, accountants would sit down with the regulator and through sandboxes decide what would be the best solution for their specific business and the provision they provide, services they provide. So for the financial services sector is the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, and they will be the regulator for this sector. And given the limited sources, finite sources, the door is not open to every single financial service provider. There will be finite number of participants in the sandbox, and you can find the list of those firms accepted by the FCA in a list. I put the link there. Once the slides are shared, you can go and have a look at them. And the issues that arise in the context of regulatory sandbox are multiple. Do they create race to the bottom because they may exclude or they exclude other interested parties in the regulation of AI and financial services? For example, NGOs or other interest groups. Does joining the sandbox mean that particular firm is endorsed and is more trustworthy? Does that mean less scrutiny? Does it create multiple layers of governance and regulation because we have 90 plus regulators in the UK. And given that a single AI system may be deployed in different contexts, does that create then two different types of regulatory standards? These are some of the risks I can inherently identify. But let's talk a little bit about, use my time to look at how, for example, the legal obligations can be empowered or enhanced or be made better perhaps by the use of technology. So I'm just giving one example, which is the Markets and Financial Instruments Directive from the EU, which has been incorporated into the UK legal framework since Brexit. So this is the Financial Services Markets Act. I'm sure there are better experts than I am in terms of what this law means and its critique, but I thought this is a good example in which we can contextualize the use of AI. So, as you may or may not know, the law I'm referring to creates a number of obligations when onboarding a new customer who wants to invest. So these are the summaries of those requirements, whether the type of investment is suitable for the customer, and you have to collect multiple different types of data, information about the client. Do they know what an investment means? Do they have any experience? What are their financial situation? What are their objectives and their risk tolerance? These are the typical questions one would ask. So how can AI can aid with the requirements of this sort of legal regime? So the AI can really quickly nowadays process not only structured data. What we mean by structured data is anything like on a text, email, Word document, and emails and whatnot, but also handwritten documents or photos or images that can be captured, and behavioral data that can be quickly analyzed. Dynamic risk scoring can, be done by machine learning models that can calculate the risk tolerance and personalize recommendations. And then continuous monitoring, fraud and mis-selling prevention, regulatory reporting, and there's always an audit in a system if you design it well. For example, I haven't designed one for investment, but our tool for tracing illicit money flows in various organized crime and money laundering schemes for investigation was designed in a way that no one can actually meddle with the information that's uploaded there. And you can't change it because ultimately those reports, which may not be at that time evidence, but they can become evidence in a court of law, and therefore we need to protect and audit, be able to see who was entered at what time and whether anything was changed or not. So it can improve transparency in that respect. The question remains, though, since we're talking about autonomy and adaptiveness. So we've had, even with the earlier models of some autonomous systems, creating huge problems for us in the financial sector. Knights Capital incident, some of you may remember that, ended up a company closing down and being fined horrendous amounts of dollars for that incident. This was an automated trading system which activated a dormant code and was buying, selling shares. And before it was realized, not long actually, 45 minutes, but in trading it can be a long time. A lot of purchasing of stocks and selling of stocks were done erroneously. So we need to be able to capture that sort of damage. And this led to some good examples of governance. Now it is a legal requirement in the US and in the UK, at least in the trading sector, to have a kill switch and a monitoring software to identify anomalies in trading. Okay, so given that we don't have, I said, a specific legal instrument that governs AI, We have other obligations like the one I've been talking about, onboarding in investment, some of the due diligence and checks we need to do. It doesn't mean we don't have any law. So some of the best solutions have been created many, many decades ago, sometimes centuries ago. When I was, as a PhD student, I was doing the impact of counterterrorism legislation on human rights, and that was a case of a preacher, Abu Hamza. He was, inciting terrorism, um, and killing of British soldiers, and he was not convicted under anti-terrorism legislation, which we had about five, six of them since 9/11. I think he was convicted under conspiracy to murder under a law that was created in Victorian times, Queen Victoria times. So we don't always need new laws to deal with new problems. So an example I would argue is the UK Companies Act. I highlighted the section 174 in red, due to the exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence. Using yet another tool to do what you provide in the financial services doesn't negate this legal obligation. Just because you are using some smart technology, it doesn't take away that responsibility, away that reasonable care, skill, and diligence. So, we are not complete debt loss. What we are missing is, courts, judges applying this in this new scenario yet, and the cases are coming up. There's an interesting case I'm following up, which was referred, as we call it, preliminary reference request from a national judge to the European Court of Justice or Court of Justice of the European Union, and that involves an AI system being used to automatically delegate a case to different judges. And the judge had a problem with that, saying, why did I not get this case? And perhaps the judge, which was close to a government, perhaps I don't know the details of that, but he challenged it in a legal terms. How do we look at this sort of system and decide whether it's transparent, it's explainable, and it doesn't have any discrimination? So, and then we have other instruments, other legal instruments. We have anti-money laundering regulations, we have data protection, we have Equality Act, we have Human Rights Act, and lately we have Data Act 2025, which has a whole section in it to do with automated decision making. So all these can be invoked, and should be observed as a legal standard using AI. So when we talk about transparency, explainability, trustworthy AI, what we are saying is, these kind of the key principles that are complementary. They are not separated from each other. And of course, in the AI, what seems to be creating some form of confusion is the autonomy element, whereby who would be responsible if a damage was caused. Right, FCI advice. We have a unit, there's a website, there's some regulatory feedback to firms developing automated models. Just I'm putting that as information for those who may want to know how FCA imparts their knowledge. And this is what the point I was making earlier about who would be liable for any damages. Again, we have already existing huge amount of case law jurisprudence in this respect, and we can explore that depending on the context. What I want to use the rest of my time, I don't know how much time I have got left. Do I have about 5 or 10 minutes?
You're easily good for 10 minutes. You're absolutely fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no
So
rush.
now that the legal kind of I wouldn't say detailed analysis, but introduction, let's call it, to some of the key issues. Let's look at some empirical data, and that kind of identify what are the key challenges banks, or a particular bank in this instance, I won't give the name, has been using AI, and based on the empirical work that one of my PhD candidates at that time did. Now she's defended her thesis. She's a doctor. She identified 4 areas that AI creates challenges. These are ethics, regulation, technology, and operational. I won't have time to go all of them, but I want to give you a synopsis and or a snapshot of what she has found from these user perspectives from the UK bank employees. Firstly, when we did or she did the survey, it was clear that many front-facing staff did not have AI-related skills. They were not consulted whether that product would be the best to use or whether they had any concerns about it. They were compelled to use it because the company said they must. And the data shows that when they were asked about whether they are concerned about the use of AI, you can see the figures quite high, 48.5% are quite worried about it. Oh, here's the name. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I gave proper recognition to my, I shouldn't say my PhD candidate anymore. It's Dr. Duradola. She did this research. And when the bank employees were asked the impact of or effect of AI on equality in their bank operations, whether this was a valid point of concern, again, you can see, I think here, strongly disagreed and then agreed. Again, you can see the figures yourself. 50% seems to agree that AI will have an effect on equality. And then whether AI would have an effect on the promotion of privacy, dignity, and human rights. Again, the figures are telling. Numbers are not small. Again, I think that kind of underpins that we need to be really mindful if and how we want to use AI in the workplace, not just financial services. And again, this is another question about bias. Again, a lot of employees were worried about the impact of AI and bias. Right, I'll finish there, and hopefully you will have some really interesting and challenging questions. I won't promise I know all the answers, but I'll try my best to answer them.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Umut. Thank you. I have a few questions. I don't know if they're interesting or challenging, but I'll put them to you anyway. Then after we've done that, we've organized for some of our guests to reflect on what you've said so far this evening. So just to give everybody a heads up on that, we're going to be hearing from John Ashton, who's the Professor of Financial Regulation at the University of York, Steve Connolly, who's the founder of the Academy of Life Planning, Abdul Hamid Taha, who's an independent freelance consultant, and he's in Egypt right now, and Paul Bates, who's a barrister, very supportive of TTF's work. Paul is based in Canada, but is licensed for both the UK and Canada. So John, Steve, Abdul Hamid, and Paul. But first of my questions, the very first question I'd like to put to you is, in your opinion, does it make sense for there not being an overarching AI regulator? You've explained so far that each silo has its own responsibility to regulate the AI aspect of that particular industry. But to your mind, does it make sense not having an overarching regulator that's purely focused on AI itself? What are the pros and cons? What do you think about that?
If I understand correctly, Andy, you're asking, should we have AI legislation that regulates everyone
Yeah,
under one
yes.
umbrella?
Should
Is
we,
that
should
what
we,
you're asking?
yeah, should we have the legislation and should we have an AI specific regulator? Yeah.
Hmm. Um, I'm not suggesting we, for the sake of it, create yet another regulator. I think we have already very well working regulatory system, being the data protection or the financial services. It's just that we need to create a legislation that applies to all, so that it creates that standard, harmonizes the standard. For me, having the regulator with the regulated decide together what those standards should be, um, potentially can be problematic, in my opinion. Um, what would be the cons or um, advantages of that is that, I think sandboxes operate on a smaller scale
Yeah.
for that regulatory market or the sector, which may not reflect the real world complexities. Results from sandboxes or sandbox testing may not be generalizable to broader markets and populations. Um, Maybe perhaps also lack of clear guidelines or inconsistent application across jurisdictions can create confusion because some of the regulated operate in multiple jurisdictions, and participants may face uncertainty about what happens after the sandbox period ends. It can create maybe a competitive imbalance. Only selected firms are or may be allowed to participate in the sandbox, potentially giving them an unfair advantage. Smaller firms or startups might struggle to meet the entry requirements to join a sandbox. That can be quite an exclusive club.
Mm.
And I think regulatory sandbox are resource intensive. I think running a sandbox requires significant regulatory and administrative resources. I think firms also must dedicate time and personnel to, you know, for compliance and reporting, which can be burdensome. Um, and maybe the risk of regulatory capture is there because close collaboration between regulators and the firms may lead to biased decision making or favoritism. It could undermine the impartiality of the regulatory process, perhaps. And then there are concerns perhaps about consumer protection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Testing in a live environment may expose consumers to unproven or risky products. There may be insufficient safeguards or recourse for affected users in these tests. And maybe these sandboxes delay regulation, full regulation. Sandboxes may delay the implementation of a comprehensive regulation, and regulators may become overly reliant on sandbox feedback instead of broader policy analysis. And lastly, I don't know, maybe some of the participants can add to the list, but even innovation constraints, sandbox framework might inadvertently stifle innovation by imposing predefined boundaries, so that you can't, maybe take huge risks in the sandbox. Firms may tailor their innovations to fit sandbox criteria than market needs. So these are maybe some of the issues that may arise in that context. I don't know. I managed to answer
Thank you.
your question, but
Yeah, you have. You
um,
have.
and yeah.
Thank you. And a topic that's of great interest to many of our members is when an individual who has been harmed by a financial institution
Mhm.
through a scam, a scandal, banking misconduct, or anything like
Yeah.
that, they very often find themselves in something of a David versus Goliath battle with that institution. They don't have the resources to pay lots of lawyers. They
Mhm.
are very much outgunned by their opposition.
Mhm.
More and more people are turning to AI to
Yeah.
equip themselves with how to handle that
Yeah.
dispute, that transaction. Um, do you have any insights into that? And a more focused question is, would it be of any interest potentially to any of your PhD students or others to actually look at this topic? How are ordinary members of the public harnessing the power of AI
Mhm.
to level the playing field, level the battleground, if you like, when they are taking on a bank or a big institution? Any thoughts about this, Umut? Thank you.
I don't have any examples, concrete examples to, that I know of where, Joe Bloke has used an AI to, you know, bring about a complaint or a court case against the bank. But um, I think AI provides very quick access to information. But
Yeah.
I fall back to what I said earlier. Does that information provide accurate insight and results? So there's even quite a fun website started by an American lawyer. He lists all the cases that have been thrown out of court because the lawyer has used AI.
Right.
And in his files that he submitted to court, there were, a number of cases, sometimes one, but there were several cases that he cites that don't exist. So what we call these are hallucinations.
Yes. Yes.
And he's made a list of all the cases, and now there is a growing list from other countries. Other lawyers are also creating a data set of, AI created hallucinated cases. So one needs to be careful. What is at stake here? Like I tried to allude to the fact that, the reason why we wanted to make the AI system we created very robust is that, someone's liberty may be at stake. And
Yes.
here, okay, you are mentioning financial interests, but for some, those are very important things. So we can't be at the mercy of a machine deciding the outcome. And I think again, I didn't mention this until this point, but I should have, and that's naughty of me, that meaningful human control must be an inherent element of any AI system. You must always have a person, a human being in charge. And that's the reason we never allowed the AI system we created to make any decisions. In fact, we designed it in a way to always flag a question mark if the machine was not sure even about the type of information it has. An example of this I can give you is that
Yes, please.
when we were looking at investigating, for example, we had a use case of money laundering and up through online casinos. The first thing the machine does once the investigator puts in information is identifying the entities. Is it a person? Is it a company? And it came up with a name called Indiana Jones. And immediately raised the question because the machine did not know at that time whether Indiana Jones was a person or a company, an
Hmm.
online, company. And it turns out, we're glad we designed it in a way that it, raised the orange flag. What is this? So that the investigator can confirm it is not a person. It is actually an online casino that operates online on the internet. So, and then next time the machine learns that could
Yeah.
be a company rather than a fictional or a real character or a person. So I would say that we need to be careful when we engage in litigation, how we use AI. Law firms are now using very sophisticated AI systems, but the companies that provide these services also, I think, provide or use data that already exist um, from data sets that are used by the lawyers. So they are really putting the machine in front of or in between the data and the lawyer. And
Yeah.
through the AI, it is giving very quick, very, I wouldn't say always accurate, but relatively trustworthy information based on already trustworthy data, if that makes sense.
It
But
does.
when
It
a
does.
public uses, what is available like ChatGPT, I wouldn't endorse it.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very clear. Your thoughts are very clear. Let's now go to John Ashton, Professor of Financial Regulation at the University of York. John, please unmute and just chip in with any reflections you'd like to share with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. It's lovely to say
Hi,
hello.
John. I never met you, but good to see a colleague. I would call you a colleague if I may. We're both in law schools, I think.
Well, we very kindly submitted a paper to my journal, which I published a few years ago. So it's lovely to put a name to the face.
Okay,
That
lovely.
was decentralized finance and anti-money laundering.
The
But
news is, John, quickly, last week we learned that we've got some EU funding success looking at safeguarding citizens in decentralized financial products. So, yeah, so
Mm,
watch that
oh,
space. We'll be doing some really important work in hopefully in three years, duration of the project starting in September. So it's a Horizon Europe project. If you're interested, I can put you in touch with the coordinator.
always very interested to hear about things like that, I will say. But most of all, well done. Money's never easy to get, and back of the net moment now.
Yeah,
Super.
267 applications were fighting for that particular call. So we came on top, which is kudos to the whole consortium, of course.
Yeah, well,
congratulations.
listening to your talk, it was really interesting, and it spans a big area. And say, I was just thinking about say other papers that say I've taken from the UK and published on issues of AI financial services, crime, and those other things. And so it certainly has been used. I think there's quite strong evidence to commit crime where AI models have been used outside the UK, but to trade, particularly in commodities markets, there is evidence there. So the other really interesting application, which holds so much promise but also fear, for me anyhow, is robo-advising, where you could, you've got the dream that you could remove all these dreadful people which cheat cheap folk out their money, these financial advisors, who often act so poorly, and replace them with somehow an AI system which is always honest and good. The worry, though, is you could have an AI system which is trained to be bad and predatory and consistently worse than the financial advisors that we even have now. So my big question, I suppose, is there any way, do you think, that we can sandbox any of these large language models before they're actually used to actually determine what are they going to be? Are they going to be super kind, benevolent, and helpful and fair, or are they going to be the most rapacious things that we've ever seen, in terms of financial advising? I can't hear you, but I think you're doing that trick I always do if I'm not unmuting myself.
Thank you for the question. I think the answer is first, let's identify one of the problems with the language models, large language models, and the use of AI is that it's been in operation in the UK. They've been in operation in the UK for 20 years or so without any regulatory or arguably legal oversight. And these language models have been developing in that vacuum. So that's one problem. And I think how we can capture the existing or development new large language models is using the existing requirements, legal requirements, perhaps some of the best practices from, for example, the EU AI Act, because a lot of testing must be done prior to deployment because of the inherent risk of bias, discrimination, and bad advice as well, inaccurate advice. So, do we have a case for that? Not yet, but we have the South Wales police case, which was using an automated face recognition system, right? And it was found to be not compliant with data protection regulation, GDPR. The reason being there was not enough testing done by the police, whether it would discriminate. There was also no judicial oversight by the courts about the deployment of such a device. So again, we have some examples of law and standards that can be employed in answer to your question. We are not at loss as such. It's just that we need a regulator or the courts or us coming behind those existing rules and principles and say boldly, look, this should apply in the banking sector, or this should apply in the legal sector, this should apply in any sector, whether it be health or defense or, anything that's operating slightly without human oversight must be closely watched, in my opinion, and should be robust in terms of not causing harm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And guys, I'm just connecting you by email. I'm sure you'll have one or two things to talk about and compare notes. I'm sure that will be the case. Thank you very much indeed, John. We're now going to go to our next contributor to the chip-in part of our meeting. We're going to go to Steve Connolly. Steve, as I mentioned earlier, is the founder of the Academy of Life Planning. He's also a very supportive volunteer in the World of Transparency Task Force, including being a part of our advisory group that John Howard, who's also with us tonight, chairs. Steve, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And yes, thank you, Umut, as well. That's very helpful. I'm going to run through quite quickly a number of thoughts that came to mind when I was listening to you. So the first point was about why banks use AI, efficiency, productivity, risk, The the decision making that's going on inside the bank about the benefits, are they the benefits for short-term benefits for shareholders? Are they the benefits for stakeholders in the business, including the customers, for example? Why is it? A lot of the focus on the AI development seems to be on making things quicker and more profitable and that sort of thing. And whereas what really AI is doing is changing the dynamic completely, because it's shifting decision making from the banker to the end user. So the end user now has a capability that they've never had before. There used to be, prior to 2026, information asymmetry in the marketplace, and that's disappeared overnight. And now a consumer has the information available to them that they've never had before, and they can now make very good decisions, which then makes me question whether the intermediary or the advisor actually has any future at all. So that's the first thing. Second thing about the sandbox, the regulatory perimeter is around what we call retail financial capital, which represents just 5% of the average financial capital of the average human in the UK, which represents the financial capital is just 20% of the total wealth of individuals in the UK, 80% being made up with what's called human capital, the present value future earnings. So in fact, the regulatory perimeter sandbox has been looking at a circle which represents just 1% of the financial wealth of the average Brit. So what goes on inside that sandbox is probably not that relevant to the average Brit. Third point I make is that I see that because the intermediary are they required anymore? We're seeing a shift from decision making from the advisor, what I call advisor agency, to the consumer now having agency, and that's going to very much change how markets work, how everything works. I see that AI is being a leveler. Andy, you mentioned about the Goliath and David.
Yes.
So I've been helping consumers have what I call that Goliath on Goliath conversation with the banks and with regulators, etc., etc. I also, the CEO of a business called Asset Recovery Network UK Limited, I help banks who've had misappropriated assets from abroad, foreign banks, where capital has been used in the UK to buy property to hide it from the bankers. And it's also a leveler there too. It's not just a leveler in helping consumers deal with the banks, but it's also helps the banks deal with the criminals and the AI. So it's a lot easier now for me to trace assets globally using AI than it was prior to AI. So I can use AI. So it's helping me massively to help repatriate assets to banks in other countries stashed illicitly in the UK. In terms of data, you mentioned about data, and I find a big improvement when you consider that if you give the client agency, instead of all the intermediaries that they have to deal with having the data, it actually improves GDPR massively, in my view, because the data just sits in one place with the client. Whereas in the old world, the client shared the data with the advisor, which shared the data with the platform, that shared the data with the provider, which shared the data with their compliance officer, which shared the data. You have all these duplications of data in the old system. Whereas actually, if you give the client agency and they control the data, it's just one local existence of data, which very much improves GDPR. Two more points, then I'll finish. There's one is about the accuracy of the data, the hallucinations. Yeah, I find that humans hallucinate probably as much, if not more, than the technology. And I get your point about the harm hallucinations can do. So I don't say that AI is a replacement for human thought. It's a co-pilot, and it should always have the second brain being probably an expert human to look at it. And its liberty might be at the state of mercy of a machine, but sometimes that's better than being at the mercy of the bank, which is the current scenario, which is failing people hugely and massively. The last point about the robo-advisors, removing the intermediary is something I think that is very important. But when we have the sandboxing LLMs, who is the sandboxer is my question. Because if the sandboxer is a structurally untrustworthy institution, then are we not going to end up with AI that's coded in bad advice habits? Anyway, that's my list, very long list.
Great. Yeah, good set of comments and raises questions. There's also a comment about AI in medical sciences. Perhaps I can link that comment with some of the comments you made, which I didn't mention because of the time. But AI or certain types of AI systems may become compulsory tools to use, like some of the medical tools we have. You can't just go to a dentist and expect, no numbing would be used, that with a chisel and a hammer you would extract the tooth. That would be unthinkable now, right? Because there are certain agreed regulatory standards, and AI could become a compulsory tool both in financial services but also in medical and other sectors as well. So we need to be mindful of that. But first, the point you made about pushing the decision making to a machine. I mean, there is a phenomena that sociologists first coined the term responsibilization strategy. This started, we don't have much time, very quickly, after the Berlin Wall came down. The Cold War was supposedly over, and the traditional roles of the state were increasingly given to private entities. And, for example, anti-money laundering or doing due diligence, KYC, which wouldn't have been done in a sense with the banks, whose main role is not prevention and detection of crime. We had increased list of private entities doing what the state used to do. And now with technology enabling decision making, and the burden that has put onto private firms, we are pushing the responsibility to the machines, because I think it's too much for a human being to bear, going through thousands of transactions and identify, what is suspicious and what's not, whereas your pressure, your KPI is to make money, so there is kind of conflicting interest there. So I'll stop there because we have only 4 minutes left.
Yes,
I don't want to take more time than necessary. Thank you for those comments, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Umut. We're going to get a very, very quick comment now from Abdul Hamid, and then a very quick comment from Paul. Then we'll bring our conversation to a close after Umut has shared any final words he'd like to share with us. Abdul Hamid, any quick comment that you'd like to make, please?
Looking at this from the other side, the threat side, not just an opportunity. I see in the AI a threat, not just an opportunity. Criminals are smart. They are faster than regulators, and now they have AI. Simply can ask AI design a structure that is fully compliant with the existing rules, but allow me to walk away with money, for example, with OpenAI. I did it myself one afternoon. I'll give a very brief to live example. I took a recent FCA notice about safety partners. They held 150 million pounds for its appointed representative. The FCA found breaches 7.4.
Abdul Hamid, forgive me, because your signal's very weak, we're getting a very poor reception. Can I make a suggestion to you, please, because we cannot hear you properly? Please send my colleague Alexandra a note about the point you're making. Then when we circulate the follow-up notes, we'll include that point in it because we cannot hear you very well. My apologies, but that's probably the best thing to do. We're going to go from Abdul Hamid now to our final contributor to the chat. I've just noticed John Ashton's got his hand up. We'll go to John as well. So can we please next go to, who's next on our list here? We're going to go to Paul Bates, of course, in Canada. Paul, a quick comment from you, please, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the stimulation of this presentation. And I need a little encouragement, and a Pollyannish answer would be wonderful. I know everyone out there is using AI to supply and sell goods and services. Is someone going to come up with a consumer-oriented AI? So if I want to buy a television, I can just ask the question and get a trustworthy answer of choice, price, deliverables, and every other product or service. Tell me who's doing that.
Yeah, I'm not a marketing genius, so I don't know. I'm sure there are a whole lot of research being done on that. Um, I think a colleague comes to mind is Sally Dibbs, who's just moved to Manchester Met University. They've done a lot of work on, trustworthy advertising and things like that. So I'm sure there's a whole field of inquiry there. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
I guess it will take somebody to bring together the data sets in organizations like, for example, Trustpilot, where you might get your trustworthiness data and your pricing engines as well. Something like
Interestingly, Andy, China has passed a law last October, which now is a legal requirement to state any content, whether it's advertisement, music, photography,
yeah,
to have a label to indicate to the consumer that it's AI generated. So, something like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be always restrictive. I'm not in in favor of always regulation, more law, prohibition of stuff. It's more about telling the consumers honestly what it is, right?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and allow people to make a decision on that basis. So sometimes solutions are quite simple, a bit like Spotify got rid of pirated music being downloaded, right? We don't have a reason to steal the artist's works, but of course, Spotify doesn't pay enough. That created another problem. But at least
yes,
we don't
yeah,
have illegal downloading of music anymore. There's no reason to. Even if you don't pay, you're happy to listen to some advertisement, you get all the list free. So
for free. Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Umut, and thanks for your input as well, Paul. John Ashton, did you put your hand up again, John? I think you wanted to come in with another point, did you?
Well, it was just the gentleman, I'm trouble pronouncing your name, who made the point about how criminals use AI. Of course, they do.
Abdul Hamid, yes, Abdul Hamid.
Sorry. It's
Yeah,
just really to say and trying out using AI themselves. So, of course, there is work that's identified this is occurring already. Market abuse, if undertaken by AI or whoever, is a crime, and we shouldn't be doing it. So a lot of the AI used for crime, of course, is being undertaken in third countries where it's very, very hard to extradite people. And
yeah.
you just shouldn't be trying to do it in the UK because it's something that exchanges are actively looking for and will prosecute. But anyway, I just thought I'd say that because I worry about such things. I'm sure Emma has probably got views on those that type of thing as well. But I'll be quiet. Sorry. Thank you.
Thanks again. Thank you. Umut, we're going to go to you, sir, for your final comments before we wrap up today's session. Umut, thank you very much indeed for speaking with us tonight.
Andy,
This is Con Keating. Could I
Icon.
just come in with a couple of questions for Umut, which I think are terribly important in the context of the law of AI?
Go for it. We mustn't go over too long, so please be succinct as you can,
They are
Con.
two
Thank
very
you.
short questions.
Please do. Thank you.
The first, you correctly started when you were talking about desirable attributes of financial services and so on, with transparency. The issue you have with AI and with neural networks generally is that you have no way of determining what the weightings on the nodes which create the end piece is.
Right.
So you cannot actually say how you arrived at a particular outcome. That is profoundly problematic. The second problem which you have with large language models in particular is that the outputs are probabilistic, which means that you cannot be certain. So they're probabilistic in the sense of what you're being given is a maximum likelihood. The maximum likelihood of this word following this particular sequence of words is this. Those likelihoods are actually very small. That means that if you are asked to defend your position, you really can't state that this is you certainly can't state that this is certainty, because what you're looking at is a probabilistic outcome or a probabilistic input. You have a real problem there because the unresolved and undetermined parts are actually, in all likelihood, larger than the output of the model. So it seems to me there are some profound legal issues there, which need open discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
What we call is a legal requirement, at least in the European Union, is explainable AI. There is a legal requirement, and in litigation, this will be a key feature, both, for lawyers and the judges, the courts, to know, what is admissible in terms of AI generated information. I don't want to just call it evidence, but information in general. And how do you explain how that information or evidence was created if an AI was used? And as a respondent, if it's a criminal case, it's a defendant, will have, of course, the procedural rights to know how the AI has arrived to that decision. So, yeah. So
Thank you very much indeed, Con.
Advocate of that. Yeah. Good question.
Another topic we'll no doubt return to in due course. Umut, please do share any final points you'd like to make before we wrap up the conversation.
I'd like to thank everyone for turning up and made it interesting. It made me think again about this topic. Yeah, and let's keep in touch. And I would love to, engage with you guys again when I have perhaps something more with the new project, looking at decentralized financial products and how we are making recommendations. It would be good to your input and feedback onto those solutions. Real diverse expertise here and interested parties. So let's keep it up. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Umut. Thank you. Let's show our appreciation again, folks. Thank you very much. Good night. Good afternoon, all. Take care. Bye-bye. 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 Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Umut. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.